is my presentation on Converso Cosmology. My work began with a personal question that gradually became a historical and philosophical one. How does continuity survive after the structures carrying it have been torn apart? The names I inherited, De Lemos, Fuentes, Galvez, Paniagua, Solórzano, Valiente, and many more, felt Iberian long before I understood why. They came to me as fragments without a stable story attached to them. Over time, that experience had led me toward larger questions about medieval Iberia itself, rupture, concealment, and the survival of memory after forced conversion, expulsion, and inquisitorial pressure. The thesis of Converso Cosmology is that medieval Iberia moved from plurality towards singularity, and that under this pressure, truth and continuity did not disappear but migrated into indirect forms of survival. For medieval studies, this matters because medieval Iberia was one of the great contact zones of the pre-modern world, where Arabic, Hebrew, Latin, and Romance cultures interacted continuously through philosophy, poetry, trade, diplomacy, and translation. Even the architecture of medieval Iberia preserves traces of this plurality. In spaces such as La Sinagoga del Tránsito and La Sinagoga Santa María de Blanca in Toledo, Arabic visual forms, Hebrew inscriptions, and Romance-speaking worlds converge within the same structures. One of the clearest literary witnesses to this world is El Cantar de Mio Cid. The Cid is often absorbed into later nationalist narratives as a purely Christian hero of reconquest Spain. But when we read the poem closely, a more relational world appears. Rodrigo Diaz is unmistakably a Christian figure, yet he traverses Muslim and Christian spheres through alliance, negotiation, tribute, diplomacy, and mutual obligation. The Cid matters because he inhabits a medieval Christian world, not yet fully hardened into inquisitorial singularity. Even his title reveals this plurality. Cid derives from the Arabic word Sayyid, meaning Lord and Master. The hero of Castilian epic memory carries an Arabic honorific at the level of naming itself. This title becomes what I call an athar, Arabic for a carried trace of plurality surviving within the language of the poem. Even Castilian itself preserves this relational history. Everyday words like ojalá carry Arabic sediment across centuries of contact. This does not mean medieval Iberia was utopian. Violence, hierarchy, instability, and warfare remained constant realities. But identities had not yet fully calcified into the later logic of limpieza de sangre, blood purity laws, and inquisitorial surveillance and genealogical purity. One transitional witness to this transformation is Salomon ibn Berga in Shevet Yehuda, or the Staff of Judah. Writing before inquisitorial logic fully hardened, he records a world increasingly marked by forced expulsions and communal instability across Iberia. His work preserves the atmosphere of a civilization moving towards rupture. And this transformation from plurality towards singularity is a crucial movement for my work. As Iberia increasingly organized itself through blood purity statutes, forced conversions, and systems of suspicion, continuity could no longer survive transparently. At the moment, truth began to migrate. It migrates into concealment, into polysemic critique, into irony, into opaque literary form, into names, into foodways, into endogamy, into carried traces. This migration produced what I call Converso Cosmology. One of the clearest medieval articulations of this appears in Maimonides and his Igret HaShamad, written during the Almohad persecutions. Maimonides addressed Jews forced publicly to profess Islam while privately maintaining fidelity to Judaism. Against those demanding martyrdom, he argues that survival itself is not betrayal. The merciful one accepts the forced one, the anusim, quote unquote. This becomes philosophically decisive for my project. Concealment becomes ethical preservation rather than moral failure. Hiddenness becomes fidelity under coercion. And this logic later becomes central to Converso existence itself. Public conformity, private continuity, survival through opacity. Rabbinic thought already possessed a structure for thinking continuity under instability, the thought called hazakah. Hazakah assumes continuity persists unless unproven. Within Converso Cosmology, this becomes recognition. We recognize our own, quote unquote. Not through perfect documentation, but through gestures, cadences, names, foodways, endogamy, and inherited forms of memory. This directly challenges archive-centered epistemologies because the same systems demanding proof often destroyed the conditions necessary for proof to survive. The Inquisition demanded documentary certainty while simultaneously producing fear, concealment, erasure, and archival rupture. Under these conditions, absence itself becomes historically meaningful. This insight deepened for me through the work of David M. Gitlitz. Gitlitz shows that inquisitorial systems unintentionally preserved the traces they sought to erase. Surveillance itself became a pedagogy. The archive becomes what I call an inverted yeshiva of rupture. Paradoxically, the enemy teaches through prohibitions he used to inform denunciations. What emerges from this condition is adaptive literacy under pressure, what I call ingeniosidad. The ability to read hostile systems, motivate visibility, and carry continuity indirectly across unstable worlds. A converso pedagogy of survival. This pedagogy of survival finds philosophical articulation in two thinkers. Walter Benjamin helps me think about history, not as seamless continuity, but as fragments, carrying what he calls a weak messianic power. The fragment is not failure, it is survivability. Maria Zambrano, Poetic Reason, then explains how truth survives aesthetically and atmospherically after institutional rupture. Together, Benjamin and Zambrano illuminate the philosophical stakes of Converso Cosmology. Truth survives not only in archives and official histories, but in fragments, cadences, and silences, poetry, and carried forms of relation. And this leads to one of the crude central philosophical claims about impurity. See it in the Sid's relational world, in Arabic sediment, and in the hiddenness of conversos. Those are not exceptions to purity, they are the rule. The fantasy of purity in Iberia required enormous machinery to maintain: blood statues, genealogical scrutiny, linguistic purification. The intensity of the machinery reveals the impossibility of the purity it seeks to secure. And this leaves us with a larger philosophical question. How does continuity survive after the structures carrying it have been torn apart? My argument is that it survives relationally, fragmentally, aesthetically, and atmospherically. Not despite rupture, but through the forms rupture itself produces. The carried Arabic title in the Sid, the hidden prayer, the inherited silence, the fragment, the athar. Truth does not disappear under rupture, it migrates into form. Thank you very much.